So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Emily Pearson and I'm the founder and managing director at Our Minds Work. I am joined today for Alcohol Awareness Week by Victoria Seed and Shell Righini, as we're here to talk about alcohol awareness, addiction and recovery in the workplace. So thank you so much for putting this on your agenda today and joining us. So let's jump in with what we're going to get started with. I have a little bit of agenda to go through. We're going to have a little bit of a quiz. Everybody loves a quiz. Let's see what your general knowledge is like around alcohol stats. Then it's going to be over to Shell. We're going to have a little bit of a chat around what the problem is in terms of problematic alcohol use in the hospitality industry and get some really nice insights around how it's impacting individuals, how it's impacting the industry, and also what do we need to do if we want to turn the tide on this. We will then be over to Victoria Seed. We'll be having a great discussion on the impact that addiction can have on family members. So we'll be talking a little bit about Victoria's work and how she supports those impacted by others' addiction. And again, you know, what kind of things can we do or might we recognise in the workplace where employees may be the ones that are impacted by a loved one's addiction and maybe even have caring abilities for that person. We are then going to talk about alcohol and workplace well-being. So where does alcohol fit into workplace well-being in terms of your strategic approach with a well-being strategy? We are then going over to some kind of benefits and top tips on how to create recovery-friendly workplace practices. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A, so please do put your questions in the chat box and I will make Righini from We Recover Loudly. Shell has worked in hospitality for decades. I know she doesn't look that young, but around 2 decades working in hospitality. She has a little bit of her own story to share and the reason behind why she set up We Recover Loudly. So welcome, Shell. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see you.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily, and thank you for those statistics, which are quite scary. And I read one recently that perimenopause actually affects the way women take in alcohol and metabolize it. That's the word I'm searching for. Right. And that actually during perimenopause, you'll notice drinking less will give more of an effect, which is quite it's something to be really aware of. But that is not why I'm here. As Emily said, I've worked in hospitality for 18, probably 19 years now, even though I'm only 25. And it's an industry which is deeply entrenched in a culture of excess, you know, excessive working, the hustle, the push, which is complemented, if you will, by an excessive party lifestyle. So it's drinking, it's alcohol, it's drinking, it's drugs, it's daily, very limited repercussions when you would come into work hungover, because there would be a collective kind of culture and of everyone being hungover. And over the years, obviously, I started out in the industry early on as a bog standard normal drinker, if there's such a word, i.e. loved wine, loved learning about alcohol, loved learning about liquor, loved learning about cocktails. I was training to be a sommelier. There wasn't alcohol issues directly in my family. I was planning on working on a wine farm. In fact, I'm from Cape Town originally. You know, so for me, alcohol was a very positive part of my life. It was something that I loved. But over the years and the insidiousness of what alcohol is, and more importantly, the reason behind why I was drinking continued. And this is where, while I worked for hospitality, the similarities, regardless of the industry, start to intertwine. I was using alcohol because I was stressed, because I didn't know how to ask for help, because I was being put in positions of management without any training or support. I wasn't shown who to go to when I was unsure of things. There were repercussions for not being able to perform, but without there being that kind of support as well. You know, there was no kind shoulder saying, we can see you're struggling, how can we help you? It was just constant layer upon layer of pressure, stress, overworking, no breaks, which result in burnout, you know. And that I think we can relate to regardless of our industry. And for me, every time those burnouts were coming, alcohol was the only thing I thought at the time that was the answer to this crazy head, the pain, the shame, the stigma, just everything that was going on. And, you know, for me, I can't tell you when it was the drink that took me from being a heavy drinker. I find the term functional drinker one of the most hilarious terms, because there's just no functioning when you're a functional drinker, into what would be considered alcoholic drinking. But that last 5 years of my drinking, I lost my job, my identity, very strained family, friendships, my health, my finances, you know, everything from the girl who sat there drinking a Malbec from Argentina in my early 20s and could tell you about the terroir and what meat it would go to the girl chugging a bottle of gin alone, crying, no friends, no family, no job. You're like, what happened? And so since then, I'm coming up for 3 years sober in September. My mission has been to showcase stories like myself in the hospitality industry specifically, because our industry is one that accepts excessive drinking as the culture in the workplace, which is obviously what we're talking about. It's about changing that acceptability and creating safe spaces and resources so that people who are struggling know it's okay to ask for help. In hospitality, you don't ask for help. You don't say you've got a problem with drinking. Oh, be quiet. Just carry on. What you're on about today, Shell, you know, have a bacon sandwich. That's the dialogue. So for me, it's really important to firstly just be a person in the public sphere of hospitality, to show it is possible to be recovered and work in our industry to success. And then to go deeper and go, if alcohol and drugs were not the problem, but the solution to the problem, what are the problems within our industry that we need to be looking at? And again, I think that's completely transferable to other industries. Stress, overwork, blah, 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 all of that. So yeah, so I've got a podcast which has been going for just over a year. We Recover Loudly is being registered as a CIC at the minute, which is a very long process. If anyone's ever done it, it is a bloody headache, but it will get there. And then yeah, from that, we're hoping to start to support other communities as well. My next hit list is women and women in sobriety, because we need more representation, I feel.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Can I just say congratulations on your 3-year recovery? That is absolutely amazing, Shell. Well done.
Thank you. Well, it's not till September, so it feels a little bit naughty to be celebrating it now. But isn't that funny? And then it's, again, what a gift of recovery. In the beginning, you're like 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and now you just go, oh, it'll be fine, you know. So that's a really cool thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to go back to this, your journey into addiction, I think that is a really important part of what we're talking about here in terms of workplace well-being. I call workplace well-being, you know, it's the golden thread, it's the big umbrella for an effective workplace and for humans to be thriving. And what we found is that addiction is literally the final taboo of workplace well-being. Nobody is talking about it. We're talking more about menopause than we are around addiction. And it is still shrouded in that stigma and that shame of what people are going to think about us because of this term addict, alcoholic. It conjures up this view in our mind of somebody who's homeless, unable to function, you know, had the kids taken off them. It's just a small reality of addiction, because like you and I have both struggled with addiction and are both in recovery, and are professionals, entrepreneurs, business owners. So I think that has a big part to play in it. So in terms of your journey into addiction, how was that different in terms of, in hospitality, if drinking was so normalized, when it did become a problem, did anybody recognize that it had gone from just this is normal part of hospitality into Shell struggling with an addiction, or was it just all the same?
Yeah, I think that it's the interesting thing, and also as a side note, the reason that people don't like to talk about it, certainly in hospitality, is because it serves a function to the people that are normally at the higher levels of management. And you will find, I was just trying to see if I could find a statistic, but obviously I can't. But there is a statistic that the higher up the management train you get, the incidence of addiction rise nicely with it, which kind of makes sense. The more stress we pile on people, the more that we're looking for these outlets, which is effectively what drinking is. Then the reason we don't have change is because we're not going to change if it's serving somebody and it's serving the people in power. And the challenge is that those are the hard people to make the change. But back to the question, which was regarding, did anyone notice? No. And what instead started to happen were conversations of, God, Shell had so much potential. What, like, she's not living up to it, you know? And there'd be conversations with management of, why can't you just get this right, you know? And I would then go and feel so disconnected from what I was doing. I would then go and drink with my team because that would make me feel a part of something, and, you know, us against the world, us against the big man. And it was important because, you know, for me in my industry, a lot of us gravitate towards it because we need that community and connection. You know, that's something that we may not have had growing up, may not have been something in schools. You know, I'm late diagnosed neurodivergent. It's a very common narrative. So nobody picked me up on it. And because I was the fun boss, i.e. the one facilitating a lot of it, come on guys, should we have a midnight shot? Because it suited me. You know, again, why would we say anything? I hid it very well, until obviously I wasn't hiding it well. It was one of those things that I definitely thought I was doing a better job of it than I was. But because our industry is so incredibly fast paced as well, we don't make time for people's mental health, which again, I know is completely true across the board. We instead just wait for people to fall off the edge of the cliff and goodbye. And for me, and again, why I'm so open about my recovery journey, and why we're called We Recover Loudly, nobody was talking about people having a problem. It was my initial, when I lost my job, the person who fired me, he's been on my podcast, I drank with to excess. I poured beers for during service, you know, like, this guy was firing me for something we did together. Are you insane? I'd covered for him when he was hungover, you know, like, and my all I thought and all I felt when I left was that I'd failed. Not that I had a drinking problem, I'd failed at drinking. If only I could drink better. If only I could handle my liquor. And it's that moral failing that you take away from it. And nobody touches it with a barge. But if I'd gone to my managers and gone, and obviously, by the way, side note, there's lots of change, and they're an incredible company to work for. If I'd gone to them and said, I'm feeling depressed, they'd have gone, okay, I think we know what to do with this. I think there's a form. I think there's a comeback to, you know, a fit to work, all of that stuff. They wouldn't have necessarily been able to pull it out of the hat immediately, but they would have worked their way through it. There would have been resources, and they would have muddled through. If I'd gone to them and said, I think I'm really worried about my drinking, they just said, we'll stop drinking then. Don't have an after work beer. We'll have an after work beer, all of us, but you don't.
Yeah.
It just, you know, and that's why, again, and why the work that you're doing as well, you know, in Victoria, it's about a cultural shift to the acceptability of that being the only way we connect as a workplace. That's the only way we connect with our colleagues. Alcohol needs to leave the workplace, in my opinion. It's something to do on a summer's day, on a barbecue, at home, in front of a crackling fire at Christmas, whatever you want to do. But I personally don't think that alcohol has any place in a workplace, regardless of industry. It's a poison at the end of the day. And, you know, it just doesn't make sense. If alcohol's in the workplace and the openness, then we should also be allowing other drugs, you know? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in terms of when you look at it like that, there is this, especially within the industry of hospitality, where it is so cultural, you know, they would never allow people to be taking cocaine alongside it. Yeah, the only difference between those two drugs is illegal, you know, a bit of legislation.
100%. And
Yeah.
ironically, as an ex-drug addict, as well, because drugs and alcohol are equally rampant in our industry. But obviously, we won't talk about drugs in this specific seminar. I would give up cocaine before alcohol again, 100%, because there's nobody saying to me, "What do you mean you're not having a line? What do you mean? Oh, don't be boring. Do you not want to have a line of cocaine with dinner though?
Yeah,
How can you have a steak without, you know?" And I would,
yeah,
of the two, alcohol was by far the harder thing to give up.
yeah, absolutely. I can see that. Just going back to one of the things that you said, Shell, around this work-related stress. I've worked in workplace mental health for 9 years now, and what I have seen over the past 9 years is work-related stress has continued to trend upwards. This is despite it being a legal obligation for employers to prevent work-related stress by doing preventative stress risk assessments and taking action on them. Now, I know from working in the field and from our wellbeing maturity quiz that around 70% from our quiz of wellbeing leads who have a wellbeing strategy do not prevent work-related stress. They're not legally compliant with HSE legislation. And then this is leading to the highest levels of work-related stress we've ever experienced. Work-related stress that isn't managed then turns into mental health problems like burnout, depression, anxiety. Around 10% of suicide every year is contributed to work-related stresses. So, you know, what the industry absolutely huge in terms of those demands that are put onto people. How does an industry solve that when even the legal obligations are being ignored and the people who are responsible for leading mental health and well-being strategies actually don't know and are not preventing work-related stress strategically?
Yeah. Well, that's a small question to answer, Emily. So lovely. Thanks for that. Do you know what though? It's an inside job. It is. It's an inside job. And we can only, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, we can only really control ourselves. There's a meme going around saying your manager has more effect on your mental health than your therapist, than your doctor, than your, yeah, which I'm sure a lot of us have seen. And when you read that, you go, shh. And now you may not even be a manager in your role, but you're a manager to someone. You're a leader to someone. So even if you are amongst, say, in my instance, it's a restaurant, there's 5 waiters, you know, we're all the same level. Someone within that group is being looked upon as a leader. And therefore, we need to have an awareness around ourselves and what we're doing, because that's the best way to, in my mind anyway, create cultural change is by you yourself, I'm sorry to sound cheesy, but being the change that you want to see. And what's happening is that so I'm doing a presentation in New Orleans in a few weeks' time, and it's entitled Joining the Dots. And what we're not doing as hospitality, and again, all industries, we're not joining the dots and seeing that it is a timeline of an expected outcome instead of a continued like surprise at the end going, oh no, another person burnt out with mental health and addiction. What happened there? We have a policy in place. The policy is a tick box exercise. We're also expecting people who are stressed and overworked, i.e. higher management, to be the people that the people who are stressed and overworked are leaning on. But who are they leaning on? You know, it's like putting on your own mask, isn't it, before that whole analogy. So of course it's a tick box exercise. And instead of us really getting into the root of what needs to change, and again, if we look at other countries in Europe where they have got good work-life balance. I was interviewing a guy who's in Australia for my podcast the other week. They work 38-hour weeks. If they work half an hour over 38 hours, they get double pay. Double pay. That's standard everywhere, right? Imagine how you would fit 38 hours a week. That's amazing. I was looking at a contract recently for something which was 45 hours, and I immediately went, that's a lot. That is a lot. So it's a whole workplace cultural shift that needs to happen. We need to really do that as an inside job internally, and then what we can affect immediately around us. And if we continue to just keep putting band-aids on things, I'm not sure, if the last time you guys scraped your knees, but you put a plaster on that, the plaster eventually just gets a bit icky. Well, you put another plaster on top of it, don't you? Because you're busy. You're too busy to look at your knee. And then you end up putting like a bit of tape over it, don't you? And then maybe a bandage because it's still bleeding. And then what happens to that cut knee? Well, it's not gotten better because you've additionally put more bandages on it. It's festered, it's infected. I've gone a little bit too far now with this analogy, but our continuation as not just in my industry, but I think as a culture, workplace culture, to think that additional band-aids, oh, we've got an EAP, brilliant. Why are we supporting people at the end of the journey? Why don't we spend as much time and attention in making sure our workplace stops getting people to there and join those dots?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is my TED talk.
No, that I absolutely agree with everything that you've just said there. And I think one of the joining the next dot up from that and from our insights that we found through the wellbeing strategy maturity quiz is around 80% of wellbeing leads whose responsibility it is for strategic culture change and improving mental health and wellbeing, they've had no training on how to do this. So if we need to start somewhere, we've got to start with how do we help those people whose responsibility it is, these wellbeing leads, HR professionals, to have all the knowledge, the skills, the tools, the understanding of how to develop and deliver an impactful mental health and wellbeing strategy that is inclusive of understanding recovery, which we know addiction is still the last taboo. It's nowhere near being talked about as much. But that a lot of organizations still don't have the mental health pillar right yet, because managers are not being trained on how to prevent work-related stress and support mental health. I know we've got some great clients in here who are absolutely doing that already. So great to see that it is happening, but it just isn't happening enough, and it's not made mandatory either, and it's not cascaded down from the top where it has to start. So yeah, just that additional dot. There is somebody usually in employment whose responsibility is to actually do this and make these changes, but they don't know how to do it or what to do because they've never had any training, but they're super passionate and motivated to make change.
And who's supporting them? I did my mental health first aid course like 2 years ago, and luckily, because I work in this world, I'm constantly learning, I'm constantly adding to my skill set. But somebody else in restaurant, somebody's having a terrible time. Oh, didn't Shell do a certificate a couple of years ago? Shell, go talk to Gary. And the burden that falls on your own shoulders. And, again, I haven't got a statistic, but I imagine the kind of person that would put their hand up to say, I want to do that training, is normally the type of person that's quite empathic, that, takes a lot from those situations. So that person needs to be looked after. Who's making sure they've got boundaries? Who's looking after them after they look after the person that's in crisis? It's, it can't just be all fall on one person's shoulders, which again is sadly what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. So, we've got a few minutes left. I've got a bit of a question. We talked a lot about your addiction and this lack of support, the culture within hospitality, the pressures and the demands. How did you actually get into recovery then, Shell? What was that initial first step?
I lost my job November 2020 after working throughout COVID. We reopened the restaurant within 2 weeks of the first lockdown. We turned it into a takeaway. We were one of those fancy bougie burger places, so it made perfect sense. Not that I'm blaming Rishi, but eat out to help out. That was annoying. That was insane. And that COVID really working through that period of time, having members of the public coming in, having to be responsible for so many people's health and well-being, but without guidelines. Actually relating that to what we've just been discussing, in fact, it was the thing that broke me. It was 90, 100-hour weeks. It was drinking, and I was done. And I lost my job because my manager caught me stealing some wine, which even in itself made no sense, because I was like, but we drink all the time in front of you, and like suddenly because I'm caught stealing, what? Obviously now I realize why. At the time it was just made no sense. And I connected with 12-step recovery, and I heard the word alcoholic, and I thought, well, that's not me, so this isn't for me. And I kind of went in and out of those meetings for a while, as always, just thinking about all of the things I wasn't. Well, I'm not on a park bench. Well, I am, I'm dressed, I come across quite well, I can speak, and all of this, all the things that I'm not. It's not me. It's not me. I didn't see women my age. I didn't see women who were, just women who were like me. I'm trying not to, women who are kind of cool and hip like me is effectively what I'm trying to say. And so I didn't think that was my place, and I carried on blindly trying to stop drinking alone, which is really, really hard. And I think anybody in this room right now who is questioning their own relationship with drugs or alcohol, doing it alone is the hardest thing I've done, because not having just anybody to talk to, anybody to look me in the eye and go, it's okay, was shit. And eventually, after many failed attempts and many kind of periods of sobriety, it just all came to a head. And I did have a suicide attempt, a very serious suicide attempt, where I drove my car into a wall, and that next day back to AA. And it was the first time that I really just went, I have no evidence to suggest that I am not needing help. And so that, for me, the 12-step program is exactly what I needed, because it gave me the community. That, it turns out, was what I was searching all along. Somebody who could look at me and say, I've been where you are, you're okay, I know what you've been through, you're not a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. And, I continue to do 12-step. It allows me to help other people. There are many other ways to get sober. The one thing, though, that I think is the most important part is that community, that connection, whether you get it with a group of people that you find on Instagram, through the NHS, through Smart Recovery. I don't think that there's nothing like being able to sit with somebody and tell them the worst things you've ever thought about yourself, and have them go, yeah, I felt that too. It takes away all the power of the shame, as they say, that shame, when shared, takes all that power away. So yeah, that's what worked for me. And to be honest, I really do believe, regardless, finding a community and finding like-minded people is key. And just compassion. And back in the day, I wouldn't go near something like a non-alcoholic beer. Now I love them, and it's all right if you don't. And I've kind of crafted a life that makes sense to me, and now I enjoy things that I never thought I would, which is going to sound so boring to you guys, but I spent 2 hours prepping fruit on Sunday. That was brilliant. How sober is that? Just prepping a watermelon and mangoes for my week, and I get joy out of things I never thought I would. And if you told 3 years ago Shell would have got joy out of prepping a watermelon, she'd have been like, pass the gin, because I ain't signing up for that. So yeah, I think every day that I'm further away from that darkness, my life opens up a little bit more and reminds me of why there is nothing. Well, they say you have to create a life that you don't want to escape from. That doesn't mean you're creating a life that's awesome and perfect all the time. And I still cry, and I still make terrible decisions. And as you can tell, I still swear. I don't always remember to put deodorant on, so I definitely don't floss my teeth as much as I'm supposed to. Doesn't mean I'm an awesome human, but it does give me all of the opportunity to be my best self every day. And that was something I would never was and never had the ability to be. So yeah, it's a good one. I'm grateful.
Thanks, Shell. Thank you so much for sharing your story and the insights into hospitality. And I know that there are a lot of people in the room right now who are thinking about, look, how do we do this in our workplace? And I think one of the things that I will share in what you just said there is, one of the most powerful ways of helping people to find recovery is through these stories and through people sharing their experience, because it then becomes relatable to people. and that relatability helps people to understand that they're not alone and that recovery is possible. So yeah, storytelling in workplaces is a great way to help people to see that actually, you know, that person that they see as an addict in their head may be them because they're a professional, they're a CEO, it's your HR manager, because this stuff doesn't discriminate and it's not all about, you know, your low level workers. So just to kind of end off on that, when we do talk about recovery, it's contagious, absolutely contagious, and that's what we need to do. We need to have more conversations about this. So thank you so much for joining us today. So, welcome to Victoria next. So, Victoria is from the Vesta approach. Victoria has been working, supporting people, family members who were impacted by addiction for probably just as long, 20 years. Are you in it? I know you don't look as young either. Lovely young ladies with all these decades of experience working in our fields. So I just want to welcome Victoria. Victoria, welcome, and please feel free to share a little bit about yourself, the Vesta approach, and you know why are you here today talking about this topic?
Well, thanks for the invitation, Emily. We met a couple of months ago, didn't we? And we hit it off straight away, both redheads. Both with similar backgrounds as well. So I'm really grateful to be here and also up here with yourself, Emily, and Shell, because thank you for your story, Shell. It was really great to hear that here today. And, you know, I know that you've got a podcast. It's brilliant. Go and listen to Shell's podcast because I listened to some of it yesterday. It's great. I'm not personally in recovery from addiction, but we're all in recovery from something, right? And nobody does our work unless we've got a reason to. So I guess, you know, first of all, what I do, I work with mainly professionals who are living with somebody else's addiction. And the goals of my work really are to help them live a fulfilled, happy and purposeful life. So we look at all areas of life holistically, including work and business. And the second part of my work is to learn strategies to motivate their loved one to make a change. So most of my clients are either partners or parents of adult children, and it is about 50-50. I got into this world 2 decades ago. In fact, it was before that because I wanted to be a social worker. So I went to uni, social ethics, ended up working in prisons with young offenders, and I became a drug worker then. And very quickly, I realised that working with these kids who were 15 to 18 years old in isolation actually was having pretty little impact. The recidivism rate in prison was 70%. They were in, they were out, they were in, they were out, they were in, they were out. But what I noticed was that the harm reduction strategies, so the preventative stuff that you two have talked about today, they were the things that were really important to these kids. Do you know what I mean? I mean, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, let's face it, because we're criminalising drug use. And in my opinion, we should be decriminalising it, regulating it and treating it as a health issue. So they're all locked up in prison, and my job was to teach them about drugs and alcohol and hopefully try and get them to stop doing it. Impossible, but some of them did, you know, some did change. So that was the first thing. And then I realised, like, after a while, that actually we need to be working with their families in the communities if we're going to have any difference, make any difference. So I got a bit institutionalized myself. I was in prison for 6 years, but then I moved to Manchester and I started working for a charity. And at that point, we'd had a report called the Hidden Harm Report, which focused on the needs of children affected by parental substance use. And then after that, I went on to manage and develop a service which worked with the whole family. And that really was where I thought, yes, this is it, because we're working with a person. In this case, it was parents using substances. We worked with the non-using partners or other family members, and we or drinking partners. And we also work directly with children, so everybody got direct support. And that really is where I felt most comfortable working, and where we got the most outcomes, you know, the most recovery, and it was family recovery. And that's why my focus is always on the family. Some people don't have family around them, and I actually don't have a relationship with my own mother, so I understand me sitting here saying, you know, all families should be involved. Some people might be thinking, their bloody fault I'm like this, do you know what I mean? And it often is because of the trauma. But where that isn't the case, you know, if somebody has got a partner or a parent or somebody, if we can work with those people, and for two reasons really, so that they can live a better life themselves and really understand addiction and recovery, but also be, you know, a really good source of what we call social recovery capital. Because, you know, Shell touched on before, if you have people around you to support you, you know, being in a community, in a 12-step or other recovery community is great, but not everybody wants that. But people have often got people around them that are their community. So I work with the family community to support those people into recovery. Obviously, recovery is an individual choice. So usually about 3/4 of the time with my work, we can help people get into recovery. But I can't guarantee it. If I could guarantee that, I'd be, you know, everyone would be in recovery, wouldn't they? And ultimately it comes down to an individual choice of what they want to do. So that's what I do, Emily.
Thank you, Victoria. And one of the questions that I have for you is, you know, what is the actual impact then on family members of people in addiction? And, you know, when we first met, it was so interesting to me. For those of you in the room who don't know, I'm in recovery nearly a year now. So I can say nearly a year from a ketamine addiction, 3-year ketamine addiction. And my husband, and I said to you, Victoria, when I heard about, you know, the work that you do, I wish my husband had somebody to talk to around my addiction, because we were so isolated. Nobody knew what I was going through. And every day he was at work. He worked away Monday to Friday. So, you know, he'd be ringing on a night time to his wife, you know, out of her head, with the, you know, struggling with his ketamine addiction. And he, because he is from Zimbabwe, that's where he was brought up. He was never brought up in the UK, where drugs and alcohol have been such a big thing for us Generation Xers, since we were drinking Thunderbird in car parks and, you know, smoking cannabis at the age of 13. With this was our, you know, the dance music generation that we've lived through. So he really didn't understand it. Yes, but it was impacting him. So in terms of, you know, just insights from you, what are some of the kind of major impacts that somebody's addiction has on their loved ones?
Well, look, it's Alcohol Awareness Week this week, so that's why we're here. And the theme is actually understanding alcohol harm. And it's about challenging the stereotype that addiction is an individual problem, because it isn't. Statistically, you know, we've got 1 in 10 adults who are affected by somebody else's addiction. There's 1 in 5 children affected by a parent's hazardous drinking, right? We've got you know, all sorts of things going on. So some of the impacts, I mean, we're here, aren't we, to talk about workplace impact. And, you know, so there's quite a huge impact, because as you can imagine, I've got people who are, for some reason, it's women that come to me, and I'm not suggesting that only men have a problem, as we can tell by the panel today, right? That is not the case. But women are drawn and attracted to work with me. I don't not work with men, but that's just how it's gone in 7 years of business. So, you know, we have people that are unable to get to work. If they've got children, they end up taking the lion's share of the responsibility, because if they don't, then there could be safeguarding issues. So I have clients, partners who are driving around drunk, you know, and they've got to then make a decision whether to report them to police. And I'm a safeguarding professional as well. So I've got to say, listen, you know, you can't do that. Are you comfortable telling the police? no, right, well, you can't let your children be in that car with somebody that's intoxicated, because that goes beyond like what we can do in the room. Do you know what I mean? So in terms of workplace stuff, you've got to firstly be educated around it, and that applies to everyone. So everybody here, thanks for coming, because you're here because you want to learn more, and that's always the first step, isn't it? Education, awareness. And that's what I teach my clients as well. So we start with that. I've got some stats here as well. You know, we know there was a report done by AdFam where it said 80% of families affected by someone else's drink and drug use reported that it had negative effects on work. So if you've got 1 in 10 adults, 80% of them are saying it's impacting on the work. And then I've got my own stats. So 54% of my clients come to me because of loved ones' alcohol use. And I've been doing this for 7 years. So this is quite a lot of data I've got. 45% of those clients have had this problem for more than 10 years. So nearly half of my clients have put up with this and struggled with it for over 10 years, which is unbelievable, before they get help. All of my clients are employed. So there's something there about us all needing to do more that we've talked about here, and recognize what's going on. Now, quite a lot of my clients do feel comfortable talking to 1 or more people at work, because that's a haven, that's a safe space. So even just changing your policy, putting a poster up, something like that will enable people to reach out. There are charities. I charge for my services. I'm not ashamed to say it. You know, I'm a specialist in my area. I offer private support. There are charities like NACOA who help children, AdFam, Drug Fam, who have just recently changed their name to Family Recovery Addiction Support, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. They're all free, right? So there's no excuse not to give some information, just generically email it around, whatever, put it in your policies. 12.9% of my clients have dealt with it for over 6 years. So you're talking like 60% of people only reach out for help at that point. 6 to 10 years, that's a long time. And in doing that, we're really doing the people who need help a disservice, aren't we? Because if there are people living with them that are affected, if there are children affected, and the individual is struggling, does it make sense just to help them and be like, listen, you know, how my clients come to me like, how can I communicate that they've got a problem? So we look at the cycle of change or recovery. We look at like what they can do in each of those areas to have really kind, compassionate and caring conversations with their person, so that we can motivate them into recovery. Because ultimately, what usually happens is there's a lot of stress, pressure, tension, really negative communication going on within the household. The person using substances is in denial. It's all a big clash, and nobody gets anywhere. And then no offense to anyone here, but it often provides an excuse to think, well, F it then. I'm just going to go and use anyway, because all I'm getting is a lot of this at home. So we've got to find a better way. So in my work, you know, we look at well-being. That's the absolute first thing, because I can't help my clients with anything until they are relatively regulated. So we've got to look at, you know, those self-care strategies, really looking after yourself. You know, that's saying you can't pour from an empty cup is so true, because people are living in toxic stress with this, and they're going home to a household, they don't know what's going to come through the door, whether they're going to be intoxicated, sober. There's lots of broken promises. So the impacts are absolutely huge, Emily, honestly.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think you were so right in terms of these people who are impacted are in employment. What we know already from the statistics is that 70% of people struggling with addiction are employment as well. So, you know, that idea that people who are struggling with addiction are all, you know, unemployed and homeless and on the streets is just an absolute myth that we need to totally get rid of. But then the complexities of what you've just talked about there is, you know, if we've been pushing a mental health strategy for nearly 9 years now in terms of workplace well-being, we can't have a conversation about mental health without having a conversation about addiction, because they come hand in hand. 75% of people who enter treatment for addiction have a mental health problem on top of that as well. But then they're also the impact, it's also a trigger, isn't it? The problem with an addiction is a trigger for other people's poor mental health as well. So if we're having this conversation about supporting employees, we've got to add this addiction and recovery conversation in, and not just for those employees who are struggling, but also for their loved ones who are coming to work every day knowing that they've got a partner or a child or a loved one who's, you know, struggling with their own addiction as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Emily, because, you know, it's substance use disorder. There's no test for addiction. We just use that language, don't we? The term addict isn't helpful unless you're in 12-step recovery, because it means that individuals like Shell touched on before, and their families are waiting for this stereotypical addict that they've made up in their head before they get help. And we've got to change that. Even in schools, you know, I say to my school, because I've trained the staff, why have we got a bar at a school fair? That's absolutely ridiculous. So when Shell's talking about it in hospitality, that threads right through our workplaces. And I'm sure people here do the same thing. You know, you have a work event and there's booze. Well, I used to organise events in the prison service and we all got half a carafe of wine each back in the day. I mean, what's that about? So there has to be a cultural shift, but it does start with us as individuals, doesn't it, as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much, Victoria. So we've got literally 8 minutes left. I just really want to kind of solidify everything that we've talked about in terms of, you know, alcohol and workplace well-being. You know, how does this fit into the workplace? So what we know is that in England, there are an estimated 602,000 dependent drinkers, 82% of whom are not receiving treatment. And that's just people who are classed as dependent drinkers. Problematic alcohol use has its own continuum before dependency happens as well. So it's a significant amount. 70% of people struggling with an addiction are in employment. So right now you have got people in your workplace who are struggling with an addiction. Addiction is not a choice. It stems from poor mental health, from trauma. It's a coping strategy that unfortunately turns into something that we find really difficult to stop without treatment and help. So those people are in your workplace right now. And as we've seen, nobody's having these conversations. Nobody's talking about it. Alcohol is costing the productivity in the UK 7 billion every single year. So in terms of financials, you know, this is having an impact on your workplace. You're just not measuring it. You don't know about it because the worms are still in the can, so to speak. Workplace stress, it's a legal obligation to prevent it. And we know that increases alcohol use. And the statistics show us that for around 27% of employees, after a hard day, a stressful day, the first thing they'll do is they'll get home, they'll open the wine, they'll open the beer, whatever it is that is going to help to bring us down and reduce our stress. So in terms of workplace well-being, you know, how much are you paying attention to work-related stress? Because it is impacting people's mental health. It is increasing alcohol and drug use as well. And we know it is a cause of suicide. It's not just your frontline staff. The highest rates of alcohol use is actually in managerial professional occupations. And we know from today, hospitality has a particular problem and the construction industry as well. So we know that there's a problem. No one's talking about it, but it's still there. So what we found through research from the CIPD, companies have a drug and alcohol misuse survey from their drug and alcohol misuse survey. I don't like the term misuse at all, but it's there. So they did a drug and alcohol misuse survey, and they found that 77% of organisations have a drug and alcohol policy. But so what? Like Shell said, having a policy doesn't really make any difference. And what I've seen is often the drug and alcohol policies are very much around testing how to get rid of people if they are caught under the influence through a drug test, rather than seeing this as a health problem and offering support and treatment for people. Only 33% of employees are providing information on support resources. So there's no posters up about all the different support out there for people who are looking for recovery. Only 30% offer guidelines for managers on supportively handling disclosures. Yet, what you'll see in a moment is we've talked all day long about how managers should support women who are struggling with the impacts of menopause, quite rightly so, but what it shows is this massive inequality in the workplace around well-being. Only 27% provide information to employees about disclosing substance-related problems and where to access recovery support. Classic example shared there by Shell around how when she was struggling, the managers didn't know, they weren't saying anything, there was no support there, and she didn't know how to get help. She didn't know who to go and speak to or how to access recovery support when she needed it. And what I just want to show you this in a little bit of a chart from our wellbeing strategy maturity assessment. Here we are, recovery friendly practices. Only 4% of wellbeing leads have recovery friendly practices embedded into their wellbeing strategy. Mental health is one of the top ones, and menopause is one of the top ones, even higher than physical health and financial well-being and men's health as well. So this is something we need to change. As you can see from today, people are being impacted by alcohol and drugs and addiction in your workplace. These are not bad people. These are people who have used something to cope with the stresses, the traumas, their mental health, whatever it is that they've gone through. We need to offer support to those people and help them to find recovery, rather than keeping them down there and shrouding this in shame and stigma. We need to treat people with dignity and respect. So just before you go, just two more slides to go through. What are the benefits of doing this? The benefits of improving recovery-friendly practices means that you'll improve employee health and well-being. Yeah, that's one of your biggest goals of well-being strategies. So it will help to support employees through recovery, can lead to better mental and physical health outcomes. It'll help to enhance productivity. We know that people who do provide adequate support are more likely to remain engaged and productive in the workplace as well. Reduce turnover. If we are having these conversations, we're treating people with dignity and respect, we're supporting them, we know that this is going to help to engage employee retention, engagement, loyalty, and be able to attract top talent. And it's about that culture change. Fostering a positive culture can promote a culture of acceptance and support, and can enhance overall workplace morale. So how do we do that? There are a couple of ways that we can do this just before you leave. Promote a stigma-free and psychologically safe culture. You'll have heard this time and time again in terms of mental health. It's no different. We just need to talk about recovery in the same way. Create a place that's psychologically safe and stigma-free for people to do that. Implement supportive policies. This isn't just about having a drug and alcohol testing policy. This is about how do we support our people who are actually struggling, especially if they've got underlying mental health problems. How do we make sure that we provide reasonable adjustments and access to treatment and support when they need it? when we are faced with people who are struggling with drug and alcohol problems, we've got to treat them with dignity and respect. I heard a horrendous story the other day about an employee who had tested positive for opioids at work. And that was because of his medication he was taking. It wasn't that he was using opioids or heroin. And people very quickly found out that he tested positive for opioids. As he was walked off the site, his colleagues were shouting, "Oi, smackhead," out of the window at him. Like, this is absolutely disgusting behaviour, and it needs to be stopped. We need to be treating people with dignity and respect, with confidentiality. You know, these are people who, I mean, that person in this situation wasn't using heroin, but could you imagine if that person was, how they would have actually felt, knowing that that was what people thought about them? Enhance your manager knowledge and skills. You know, we know this. Our managers are your people creators. They're the people who either people want, your employees want to leave because of the management, or they want to stay because they feel supported. They feel as if they're not being put upon in terms of work-related stress and burnout, and there is a culture of well-being there. As Victoria mentioned, we've got to educate people about how to find recovery, about recognising signs that somebody may be struggling, providing resources and signposting to support if people do need it. And my last one in here is about provide access to recovery treatment and support. There are many pathways to recovery, and it's about finding what works for you. Everybody's recovery journey is very unique, and we've got to provide support just as unique as people's situations are as well. So I know that we don't have time for Q&A, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect all of the questions and I'll create a little document of answers to send up as a follow-up. So what I just want to let you know before you all disappear off for the rest of the afternoon is I'm going to follow up with an email. It'll be full of everybody's contact details and resources that you can access that have been provided by Victoria and Shell. So if you do want to contact them, you'll have everything there in the email. I'm also going to pop in the link to the Wellbeing Strategy Maturity Quiz for those of you who are wellbeing leads, HR, health and safety responsible for developing and delivering mental health and wellbeing strategies, so that you can take your own assessment and be able to identify any of the particular gaps that you may want to explore making improvements on.